When Donald Trump recognized childhood friend working as waiter at his charity gala, he never expected the dark secret that would emerge, one that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about success, loyalty, and redemption. Do comment from where you are enjoying the story. The kitchen doors swayed in John's wake, the silence in the ballroom becoming oppressive. Trump's mind raced with fragments of memory, an old newspaper headline, a winter night, and a promise he'd made to never speak of what really happened. He turned to his aide, speaking in a low voice. "Find out everything you can about him, now." As his aide slipped away, Trump forced himself back into the role of gracious host, but his practiced smile felt hollow. Every few minutes his eyes drifted to the kitchen doors, waiting for John to re-emerge. In the kitchen, John braced himself against a steel counter, his breathing ragged. A younger server touched his shoulder. "Hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." John let out a bitter laugh. "Something like that." He straightened his bow tie with trembling fingers. "Cover my section for a few minutes?" In the employee bathroom, John splashed cold water on his face. The mirror showed a man he barely recognized. Gray streaking his temples, lines etched deep around his eyes. How had 40 years passed so quickly? He'd thought the truth was safely buried, hidden beneath decades of careful silence. But now Trump had seen him, and John knew that look in his eyes, the same determined focus that had made him both a brilliant businessman and a terrifying adversary. Back in the ballroom, Trump's aide returned with a tablet. "John Martinez, sir, hired through the catering service 6 months ago. Clean record, but—" The aide hesitated. But what? His background before 2010 is strange. It's like he barely existed. Different names, different cities. The pattern suggests someone hiding, Trump finished, his suspicion confirmed. He glanced at the kitchen again. What about Bedford? Any connection to— "Sir," a donor interrupted, gesturing to the stage. "They're ready for your speech." Trump nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. As he walked to the podium, memories flooded back, not of the public story everyone knew, but of what had really transpired that snowy night in Bedford. He'd spent years building his empire, crafting his image, becoming the man who stood before them now. But one wrong move, one revelation, and it could all crumble. The microphone hummed to life. Hundreds of expectant faces turned toward him. Trump gripped the podium's edges, his knuckles white. "Distinguished guests," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Tonight, we're here to discuss second chances. If you're enjoying this story so far, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It costs you nothing, but for us, especially in these early days, it means the world. Let's continue with what happens next." The words felt like ashes in his mouth. How many second chances had he denied others while building his fortune? How many lives had he affected in his relentless climb to the top? In the kitchen, John listened to Trump's voice through the speakers. Each word seemed to carry a hidden meaning, a subtle warning. He should leave, walk out now, and disappear again. He'd done it before. But as he reached for his coat, his phone buzzed. A text message appeared. "Dad, guess what? I got into Bedford High. Same school you went to. Can't wait to tell everyone my dad was classmates with Donald Trump." John's heart stopped. His daughter's innocent message represented everything he'd feared. The past wasn't just catching up to him, it was reaching for the next generation. Through the kitchen window, he saw Trump commanding the room's attention. The same charisma, the same power he'd had even as a teenager, but now, with so much more at stake. A memory surfaced. Trump's words from that night spoken in desperation. "No one can ever know, John. Think about our futures. Think about what this would do to our families." They'd both kept their silence. Both built new lives. But now, 40 years later, their carefully constructed worlds were about to collide. In the ballroom, Trump concluded his speech to thunderous applause. But as he stepped down from the podium, his eyes locked with John's through the kitchen window. In that moment, both men knew. By sunrise, everything would change. The only question was, who would break their silence first? Trump excused himself from the crowd, making his way toward the kitchen with purposeful strides. The weight of 4 decades pressed against his chest as he pushed through the swinging doors. The kitchen staff froze, their eyes wide at his unexpected entrance. But Trump saw only one person, John, standing rigid by the prep station, his server's jacket half removed. "Everyone out," Trump commanded, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable authority. "Now." The staff scattered, leaving only the soft hum of industrial refrigerators and the tension crackling between 2 men who had once been more than just classmates. "You shouldn't be here," John said, his voice hoarse. "Funny. I was about to say the same thing." Trump stepped closer, studying the face that had haunted the edges of his memories. "Why now, John? After all these years, why show up at my event?" John's laugh was bitter. "You think I wanted this? I need the work, Trump. Not all of us turned our secrets into fortunes." The words hit their mark. Trump's jaw tightened. "I earned everything I built." "Did you?" John's eyes flashed. "Tell me, does your empire feel earned when you wake up at night thinking about Bedford? About Sarah?" The name sent a jolt through Trump's spine. Sarah. He hadn't allowed himself to think that name in years. "Don't," Trump warned, his voice dropping dangerously low. "Some things should stay buried." "Like the truth?" John's hands trembled as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. He held it up, showing Trump the text message from his daughter. "My girl just got accepted to Bedford High. Proud of her legacy, she says. If she only knew." Trump's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through his carefully maintained facade. "You have a daughter who deserves to know her father isn't the coward you made me out to be." John's voice cracked. "All these years, I've lived with your version of the story. Watched you rise to power while I ran from city to city, trying to outrun the guilt." "I protected us both," Trump countered, but the old certainty wavered in his voice. "Protected us?" John stepped forward, decades of suppressed anger finally surfacing. "You protected yourself, your family's reputation, your future. But what about Sarah's future? What about—" The kitchen door swung open. Trump's aide appeared, looking anxious. "Sir, the auction is starting. They're asking for you." Trump held up a hand, never taking his eyes off John. "Tell them I'll be there shortly." But John was already backing away, shaking his head. "You should go. Your public's waiting. Isn't that what always mattered most?" "We need to talk about this," Trump insisted, an unfamiliar note of pleading in his voice. "Properly. There are things you don't understand." "I understand enough." John grabbed his coat. "But maybe it's time everyone else understood too. Maybe it's time the world knew what really happened that night at Bedford." Before Trump could respond, John pushed past him toward the service exit. At the door, he paused, looking back one last time. "You know where to find me if you want to tell the truth for once. But if you don't—" He left the threat unspoken, disappearing into the night. Trump stood alone in the kitchen, his carefully constructed world threatening to unravel. Through the doors, he could hear the auctioneer warming up the crowd, their laughter and chatter a stark contrast to the cold dread settling in his stomach. His phone buzzed, a message from his aide. "Sir, found something about Bedford High, 1982. Old police report sealed by court order, and a death certificate for Sarah Collins." Trump closed his eyes, memories flooding back. Sarah's smile, the snowfall that night, the choice they'd made, and the secret that could destroy them all. Trump's return to the ballroom felt like walking through a fog. He went through the motions, raising his auction paddle, smiling at the right moments, shaking hands with donors. But his mind kept drifting to the sealed police report, to Sarah Collins, to the threats lurking in John's words. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his aide. "You need to see this. Security footage from Bedford High Archives, December 15, 1982. The night Sarah." Trump's hand tightened around his phone. "Where?" "Your office. 20 minutes." Making his excuses to the gathering crowd, Trump slipped away from the gala. The ride to Trump Tower passed in a blur of city lights and mounting dread. Each passing minute seemed to chip away at the carefully constructed walls he'd built around that night. In his office, the lights of Manhattan sparkled through floor-to-ceiling windows, but Trump barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the grainy footage playing on his laptop screen. The video showed Bedford High's snow-covered parking lot. 3 figures moved through the frame, 2 boys and a girl. Even in the poor quality, Trump recognized himself, John, and Sarah. His younger self gestured animatedly. Sarah stepped back. John moved between them. Then static consumed the screen. "That's all we could recover," his aide said. "The rest was corrupted, or deliberately erased," Trump finished. He leaned back in his chair, memories flooding back with brutal clarity. Sarah had been brilliant. Class president, debate team captain, destined for greatness. She'd also been the only person who knew what really happened that night. The only one who could have exposed everything. Trump picked up his phone, dialing a number he'd kept buried in his contacts for decades. "Get me everything on John Martinez's daughter," he commanded. "School records, social media, everything. And find out who else might have copies of that footage." But as he hung up, a new message appeared, from an unknown number. "Remember Sarah's last words. The truth always finds its way home. Meet me at Bedford High, midnight. Come alone, or tomorrow everyone learns what really happened to their beloved class president." Trump's hand trembled as he set down the phone. Outside his window, snow began to fall, just like that night 40 years ago. In a modest apartment across town, John sat at his kitchen table, old newspaper clippings spread before him. Headlines jumped out: "Bedford High star student missing," "Search continues for Sarah Collins," "Community mourns as hope fades." His daughter's acceptance letter lay among them, its cheerful tone a cruel contrast to the tragic headlines. "Dad!" His daughter's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "What are these? And why did Mom just call crying about Bedford High?" John stared at his daughter, so much like Sarah, with the same fierce intelligence in her eyes, the same determination to uncover the truth. "Sit down, sweetheart," he said softly. "There's something you need to know about your new school, about a girl named Sarah Collins, and about why some secrets are better left buried." His phone lit up with a text. "I'm impressed, John, but are you sure you want to play this game? Remember who has more to lose?" John looked at his daughter, then back at the headlines. "Actually," he typed back, "I'm not the one with everything to lose, not anymore." As midnight approached, 2 men prepared to face their past. One in a penthouse office, one in a humble apartment, both knowing that by sunrise the truth about Sarah Collins would finally emerge. The only question was, whose version of the truth would survive the night? Looking at his daughter's questioning face, John felt the weight of 4 decades of silence. The truth had stayed buried for so long, not just because of Trump's power, but because of his own cowardice. "The headlines only tell part of the story," he began, touching a yellowed newspaper clip. "Sarah Collins was more than just another missing person. She was brilliant, fearless, and she knew things that could have changed everything." His daughter picked up one of the articles, her eyes widening. "Wait. Donald Trump? He went to Bedford, too? We all did. Trump, Sarah, me. We were at the center of everything. The perfect students, they called us. The ones with the brightest futures." John's voice turned bitter. Funny how things turn out. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Trump. "Think about what you're doing, John. Some doors shouldn't be reopened." But John's fingers were already flying across the keyboard. "Too late. I've made copies of everything. Sarah's journal, the real police report, everything you thought disappeared. One call and it all goes public." Across town, Trump read the message, his face growing pale. Sarah's journal. He'd thought it was destroyed that night, lost in the chaos that followed. If John really had it. He pressed an intercom button. "Get the car ready and call my lawyer." But before he could stand, another text arrived. This one with an attachment. A photo of a worn leather journal, its pages clearly visible. On them, Sarah's distinctive handwriting spelled out words that made Trump's blood run cold. "I know what they did, and I know why. After tonight's debate, everyone else will know too." Trump's hands shook as he closed the image. That debate. The night everything changed. The night Sarah had threatened to expose them both. The night she disappeared. In his apartment, John watched his daughter reading the old articles, her reporter's instinct clearly kicking in. She was connecting dots he'd spent decades trying to keep separate. "Dad," she said slowly, "these articles mention a big debate tournament, the same night Sarah vanished." She looked up at him. "You were there, weren't you?" Before John could answer, his phone lit up one final time. A message from an unknown number. "The truth about Sarah Collins isn't what either of you remember. Meet me at the school. I'm tired of carrying this secret alone." The message was signed simply S. John stared at his phone, the blood draining from his face. It couldn't be. After all these years. Both men, in their separate locations, felt the ground shifting beneath their carefully constructed lives. The past wasn't just catching up, it was about to explode. And somewhere in the snowy night, a third player waited, ready to reveal a truth that would shatter everything they thought they knew about that fatal night at Bedford High. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing Bedford High's empty parking lot in white. Trump's car pulled up silently, his driver killing the engine. Through the swirling flakes, the old brick building loomed like a shadow from the past, its windows dark except for one, the debate hall, where a faint light flickered. "Wait here," Trump ordered, stepping into the bitter cold. Across the lot, another car arrived. John emerged, his collar turned up against the wind. Their eyes met across the distance, decades of unspoken words hanging in the frozen air between them. Neither man moved at first, both watching, waiting. Then a third light appeared, a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness near the school's side entrance. Trump's phone buzzed. Through the gymnasium, like old times. John received the same message moments later. They exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. Whatever waited inside, they'd face it together. The gymnasium door creaked open at their touch. The beam of John's phone flashlight revealed familiar territory transformed by time. Dusty basketball hoops, faded championship banners, the school mascot's fierce eyes watching from center court. "Remember how many debates we held here?" John's voice echoed softly. "How many times we faced each other at that podium?" "Until Sarah changed everything," Trump replied, his own flashlight beam finding the old stage. A noise from the hallway made them both turn. Footsteps, growing closer. They followed the sound, moving through corridors that held too many memories. Past Sarah's old locker, past the trophy case where their photos once hung side by side, past the classroom where they'd all stayed late that final night, preparing for the debate that never happened. The debate hall door stood ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway. As they approached, a voice drifted out, one that made them both freeze. "I wondered how long it would take you both to come back here." The voice was older, rougher, but unmistakable. Trump's hand gripped the door frame. John's breath caught in his throat. They stepped into the room together, and there she was. Sarah Collins sat at the old teacher's desk, her silver hair catching the lamplight, her face lined but still bearing the sharp intelligence they remembered. Beside her lay the leather journal, the one they thought lost forever. "Hello, boys," she said softly. "We have unfinished business." Trump found his voice first. "How everyone thought that I was dead?" Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Sometimes disappearing is the only way to stay alive, especially when you know too much." John took a step forward. "The journal. You've had it all this time." "Insurance," Sarah replied, her hand resting on its worn cover. "Against the day when one of you might decide to rewrite history." She opened the journal, its pages crackling. "Shall I read it? Your faces suggest you remember what's written here. About the money, the cheating ring, the deals with the college board." Her eyes locked onto Trump's. "The real reason you became so successful so young." Trump's jaw tightened. That was a lifetime ago. Was it? Sarah stood slowly. "Tell that to the students whose lives were ruined. Tell that to the families who lost everything when the truth about the admissions scandal started to leak." She turned to John. "Tell that to the man who spent 40 years running from his own conscience." John's voice shook. "We were just kids. We didn't understand." "You understood enough to threaten me when I decided to expose it," Sarah cut in. "Both of you. In this very room." The memory hung heavy in the air. Their angry words, Sarah's defiance, the sound of a slamming door. What happened next had haunted them all. "But that's not why I called you here," Sarah continued, pulling something else from her bag. "This is—" She held up a USB drive. "Everything. Every document, every transaction, every name, including some that are still relevant today." Her gaze pierced Trump. "Some who became very powerful people." Trump stepped forward, his voice low. "What do you want?" "Want?" Sarah smiled sadly. "I want what I've always wanted. The truth, not just about the scandal, but about what really happened that night, when one of you decided silence was worth any price." John's face went white. Trump's hands curled into fists. Sarah looked between them, seeing the same boys she'd known all those years ago, one driven by ambition, one by fear, both capable of terrible choices. "So," she said quietly, "who wants to confess first?" Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their footprints, erasing all evidence of their return to Bedford High. But inside that room, the past was about to break free, bringing with it revelations that would change everything. And in the shadows of the hallway, unnoticed by all three, a fourth person watched and waited. John's daughter, her phone recording every word. The silence in the debate hall stretched taut as piano wire. Sarah's words hung in the air, each man wrestling with memories they'd fought decades to suppress. Trump broke first, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "You have no right, after all these years, to just appear and threaten." "Threaten?" Sarah's eyes flashed. "Like you threatened me? Think about your future, Sarah. Think about your family's reputation. Wasn't that what you said, Donald?" She turned to John. "And you just stood there watching him pressure me, your best friend, the girl you claimed to love." John flinched as if she'd struck him. "I did love you. That's why I tried to warn you." "Warn me?" Sarah's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "Is that what you call it? Following me to my car that night, trying to convince me to destroy the evidence?" In the hallway, John's daughter pressed closer to the door, her hand steady as she filmed. Each revelation hit her like a physical blow, but her reporter's instinct kept her silent, watching. "The admissions scandal was bigger than any of us realized," Sarah continued, opening the journal. "Parents paying millions to guarantee their children's futures. Test scores changed, academic records falsified." She looked at Trump. "And you, the brilliant young entrepreneur, taking your cut of every transaction." Trump's face darkened. "I built my empire on more than that." "Did you? Or did those early connections, those wealthy families who owed you favors, give you the foundation you needed?" Sarah's voice was relentless. "How many other secrets did you bury on your way to the top?" John stepped forward. "Sarah, please, think about what you're doing. Think about our families." "I have thought about nothing else for 40 years. The force of her words made both men step back. "While you built your empire," she pointed at Trump, "and you ran from city to city," she turned to John. "I watched. I gathered evidence. I waited." She stood, her presence filling the room despite her small frame. "And now you're both going to tell me the truth. About that night. About what really happened after I left this room." Trump and John exchanged glances, a look heavy with shared guilt. "We didn't," John began. "Choose your next words carefully," Sarah warned, holding up the USB drive. "Remember, I have proof of everything, including what happened in the parking lot." Outside the door, John's daughter's heart pounded. The parking lot. The security footage she'd glimpsed on her father's table. The missing pieces were starting to align. Trump moved toward Sarah, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Some truths are better left buried." "Like the truth about who was driving the car that night?" Sarah's words fell like stones into still water. "The car that followed me? The one that forced me off the road?" Both men went pale. "Oh, yes," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I remember everything. The headlights in my rearview mirror, the horn blaring, the guardrail breaking. They all thought I died in that ravine, the perfect solution to everyone's problem." She opened the journal to its final page. "But someone survived. Someone saw which of you was behind the wheel. And now, after 40 years of silence, that truth is finally going to come out." In the hallway, John's daughter's phone slipped, hitting the floor with a soft thud. 3 heads turned toward the sound. The past was about to collide with the present, and no one in that room was prepared for what would happen next. The door creaked open, revealing John's daughter, her fallen phone still recording on the floor. The look on her face, shock, betrayal, dawning comprehension, hit John like a physical blow. "Amy," he whispered, reaching for her. She stepped back, shaking her head. "All this time, you knew. Both of you knew." Her voice trembled, but her jaw was set with determination. "And now everyone else will know too. The live stream's been running since I got here." Trump lunged for her phone, but Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop!" She held up the USB drive. "It's too late anyway. While we've been talking, everything, the journal, the evidence, all of it, has been uploading to multiple secure servers." Her eyes met Trump's. "The truth is already out there. The only question is, will you finally tell your version of it?" The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the old heating system. Outside, the snow continued to fall, as it had on that night 40 years ago. Trump sank into a nearby chair, suddenly looking older, more vulnerable. "You don't understand what was at stake," he said quietly. "My father's investments, the family name." "I understand perfectly," Sarah replied. "What I want to know is, did you mean to kill me that night? Or was running me off the road just supposed to scare me into silence?" All eyes turned to Trump, but it was John who spoke. "It wasn't him," John said, his voice barely audible. "It was me." Amy gasped. Her father, the man who'd taught her about integrity, about standing up for the truth, continued speaking, each word seeming to age him further. "Trump was the face of the admissions scheme, but I was the one who made it work. Changing grades, falsifying records, I had access to everything as the administrator's assistant." He looked at his daughter. "We were poor, Amy. Your grandparents were drowning in medical debt. When Trump offered me a way out—" "But Sarah found out," Trump added, something like respect in his voice. "She was too smart, too honest. She threatened to expose everything. I tried to reason with her that night," John continued. "Followed her car, flashing my lights, honking. I just wanted her to stop, to talk. I never meant—" His voice broke. "When her car went through the guardrail, I thought— we all thought." Sarah stood, moving to the window. "I managed to crawl out before the car caught fire. When I saw the news reports declaring me dead, I made a choice. I disappeared, gathered evidence, waited for the right moment." "Why now?" Amy asked, picking up her phone, the live stream still running. Sarah turned, a sad smile on her face. "Because history was about to repeat itself. Your acceptance to Bedford High. It wasn't just grades. Was it, Donald?" Trump looked away. "Old habits die hard. When I saw John's daughter had applied—" "You pulled strings," Amy finished, realization dawning. "Made sure I got in. Why?" Guilt, Sarah answered for him. The same guilt that made him keep track of John all these years, making sure he always found work, even when he was running from city to city. The truth settled over the room like the snow outside, soft, cold, transforming everything it touched. John stepped toward his daughter, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, Amy. I never wanted." But Amy was looking at Sarah. What happens now? Sarah picked up her journal, running her fingers over its worn cover. Now the truth comes out. Not just about the past, but about how money and privilege still corrupt the system today. How the children of the wealthy still buy their way to the top. How nothing has really changed. She turned to Trump, unless... Trump met her gaze, understanding dawning. Unless we change it ourselves. In the days that followed, the story exploded across national media. Trump Industries announced a $1 billion education foundation dedicated to ensuring fair